Alright, we've got a tough topic here, one that might even be a little bit painful. I think that some of rock's most legendary guitarists are on the verge of disappearing from the cultural conversation altogether. Not because they weren't or aren't great, not just because their style of music is fading, but because time, trends, and generational drift have a way of burying even giants. So right here, we're going to look at 5 absolutely iconic players who may be on the verge of becoming obsolete. And the one thing that I want to point out about all 5 of these players is that at one time or another, each one of them was considered to be the next big thing. So let's see how their legacies are shaping up these days. And remember, this video isn't a takedown. I love each one of these guitarists. This is a love letter to 5 guitar players that I think might be on the verge of disappearing. So coming in at number 5 is Steve Stevens. And Steve Stevens has a really simple, straightforward problem. Even though he should be one of the biggest names in the rock guitarist conversation, he's a victim of being almost too talented. And by this I mean he has abilities in so many different directions. He can shred, he can play classical, he can play atmospheric textures, and he can play pop music. But he wasn't just one thing, and that confuses not just audiences, but also algorithms, and that's important in the modern era. And there's another thing that stands in his way, which is his incredible collaboration with Billy Idol. Yeah, they made brilliant music, but this single collaboration overshadowed everything else that Steve Stevens ever did. And if people know him at all, they know him through Rebel Yell. They don't know about his incredible guitar gifts. Another angle on Steve Stevens is that his main innovations are kind of under the radar. He shaped Billy Idol's sound, but he also shaped 80s guitar production, and he wasn't a spotlight hog. So his contributions in the way of production live on, but nobody really knows about it. Coming in at number 4 is a one-time superstar, George Lynch. And George Lynch is probably the most technically monstrous player on this list. He has phrasing, he has a shred vocabulary, and he has a huge problem, which is that his guitar playing was so overshadowed by one player in particular, and that is Eddie Van Halen, that George Lynch just sort of got buried in the process. And he was a victim also of the grunge movement. At the time that George Lynch's abilities on the guitar were peaking, grunge was moving in, and nobody cared anymore about heavy metal riffs or licks or any kind of guitar hero antics. At this point, while Lynch deserves Mount Rushmore status, not that many people even remember who he is. And being part of Dokken is going to get him, for better or worse, anchored to the hair metal movement, which is being taken less and less seriously as time moves on. He does have a doorway legacy, which is that a new wave of heavy metal kids may discover all of the hair metal bands and gravitate back towards Dokken's guitar playing. Because although he came around at the same time as Eddie, and as I say was a victim in some ways of Eddie's legendary innovations, he wasn't really like Eddie Van Halen, and his guitar playing deserves a listen. Now, coming in at number 3 is The Edge. Some people are probably still really passionate Edge fans, and some people have probably already even forgotten who he was. And the big reason why Edge is on the verge of being forgotten is because he was a great innovator with effects pedals, and he had a great vision of what the guitar could do. But this generation doesn't care about any of that because they live in a digital age where AI can make anything at the touch of a button. What they care about is virtuosity. Looking at guitarists who have speed, hearing guitarists who have spectacle along with their musical ability, and Edge never had any of that. What he really had was a thorough understanding of how to use delay, texture, and rhythm. And he's the reason that modern guitar as atmosphere, his work is kind of foundational, but it's not very pyrotechnical, and there aren't any viral worthy moments of his playing for people to look at now who may have never heard U2. Whereas with other players, you can easily isolate a solo or a brilliant performance and put that out on TikTok. And while U2, as a band, may have a lasting legacy, I think that Edge's legacy as a guitarist is definitely in jeopardy. Coming in at number 2 is one that really saddens me to see on this list, but unfortunately I think it's true. It's Michael Schenker. And the reason that Michael Schenker is on this list is because while he is a guitarist's guitarist, he is not a player that the general public has any idea about, let alone will be likely to remember. He's one of the most technically gifted rock musicians of the 1970s. He's got great melodic phrasing. He influenced entire generations of other players, but he never had mainstream exposure. His best work is locked behind like a deep fan wall. If you don't know UFO, you probably don't know Michael Schenker. And if you ask a casual rock fan these days about a song like Rock Bottom, they'll shrug and say, "What are you talking about?" He didn't have a big, iconic character moment. He didn't have a breakthrough album. He didn't have a signature song. He didn't even have some kind of infamy to go along with him where he did some crazy thing that made headlines. Schenker was a legend, but he's a whisper now compared to the shout that he deserved. Coming in at number 1 is Joe Perry. That's right, the lead guitarist and co-face of Aerosmith. I know that this is a controversial pick. Joe Perry should be untouchable. And it's well known that he's influenced an entire generation of players, including Slash, James Hetfield, Dimebag Darrell. Lots of people point to Joe Perry. So how could someone this influential be fading in public awareness? How did Joe Perry make my list? Well, I think there are 3 forces pushing Joe Perry toward the cultural edge. One is that Aerosmith is known now much more for their late career pop period than for what they did in the early and mid 70s, with Joe Perry being upfront and contributing a lot of innovative guitar work. The band hasn't had a guitar-based hit song in decades. They haven't even had a hit album in decades. But when they were hitting the airwaves and making a lot of noise, it was for music that was based around songs, not the guitar. And by then, Joe Perry was more of a face than a guitar hero. Another factor is that the band's identity is split. Like I say, there are 2 faces of the band. One is Steven Tyler and one is Joe Perry. But as time moves on, most younger listeners think of Aerosmith primarily through Steven Tyler. He's like the scarf guy from American Idol. Nobody really remembers Joe Perry, even though he was instrumental in shaping their sound. Another problem for Joe Perry is that classic rock radio is the stronghold for Aerosmith at this point, but the stations only play like 3 songs: Dream On, Sweet Emotion, and Walk This Way. Joe Perry's best guitar work is on songs like Nobody's Fault, or Sick as a Dog, or Toys in the Attic, and these songs rarely get any attention or any rotation anywhere these days. So is Joe Perry going to disappear? No, but his influence is going to be reduced to just being part of Aerosmith, and he's not going to be remembered as a great guitarist. At least this is my opinion. Now here's the truth. None of these guitarists are going to disappear, but people are going to stop very quickly understanding why each of them mattered, unless people like us keep telling their stories. Legacy isn't automatic. No matter how good you are as a player, it's maintained, preserved, and argued passionately for by fans. Right now, the rock world isn't producing a lot of new myth makers, so there's a gap, a kind of silence, and a fading horizon, and that horizon is getting larger and larger with every year that goes by. These 5 players that I've mentioned on this list are in jeopardy of falling over that fading horizon. So let me know in the comments, which of these legends do you think deserves a full comeback? Which one of them do you think will have a full comeback in public awareness? And which one do you think is at risk of being forgotten? Or do you think that there's another guitarist that should be on this list that I haven't mentioned? Go ahead and put it down in the comments.
Music Guru here, asking you to help us on our march to 10,000 subscribers.